The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it, here to receive and uphold it. I vow to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning. To liberate all beings, let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Let us continue our class with the Surangama Sutra. Today we will continue with our teaching on the verses. As I've stated last time, there are two types of verses, two types of shlokas. One is the quoted teachings, the ones that simply repeat the teachings that the Buddha had given before. Let it be the repetition or the quotations, in fact, the previous teachings that had already expound the particular meaning, but over here it is stated again, the meaning had been stated again in the shlokas format. The second type of shloka is called the self-arising shloka. It is with sudden arising, the Buddha would give teachings similar to sudden growth of plants out of ground. From the vast ocean of wisdom of the Buddha, there would be profound teachings that arises and appears. So this is called the self-arising shloka. Out of the 12 categories of sutras, there is a type of sutra that is basically all in formats of shlokas, all in formats of such self-arising shlokas. Later we will talk about this self-arising shlokas. Sometimes, whenever we have the moderator call the names of our fellow Sangha member to give presentations, because people's names could be very similar, and then there are different people that would stand up from the crowd. It almost seems like it's self-arising. It's similar to that. Now let's look at the next shloka. It says that the knots must be untied successively when the six are released. Even the one cease to be. Select an organ preferred for perfect penetration, enter the flow, and realize proper enlightenment. Over here, as we had studied yesterday, Ananda asked, while he doesn't understand how the foundation of both samsara and nirvana are the six roots, and how to untie the knots. He didn't quite understand. For such reason, the Buddha started expounding on the six knots. The Buddha said that the knots must be untied successively. When the six are released, even one cease to be. There are various ways of explanations of explaining this particular verse. Some says that if you were to untie the six roots, then one cannot establish the Dharma that is nirvana. But some Dharma teachers would also refute this particular proclamation. They would state that the six knots, as long as we can untie it, the six knots that ties us to the samsara, if we can untie them, then there would be not even one would be established. All of them would be seized. And the method to do so is to first select one organ, a preferred organ, and preferably that would be the ear organ. Out of the six, as we've already studied, out of the six organs, the ear organ would be the most convenient, or has the best condition for us to practice upon. Therefore, we should start from there, and then systematically we should be able to also practice or attain the perfect penetration of the 6 organs. In this way, we would be able to enter the flow and realize the proper enlightenment. It says that we should understand the true nature of the 6 roots successively. Then eventually we will be able to realize the proper enlightenment. I think the 6 roots are explained really well over here, but I noticed that the Chinese masters tend not to explain too much around here. Today we will further study the 6 knots that the Buddha would expound with the examples. We probably won't be able to finish all of them today, but we will get into them today. Over here it says that out of the 6 knots, if we were to seize 1 knot, then all of the knots would be able to get unknotted or unfettered. We should be able to understand it in such a way. Now the next shloka, extremely subtle, the Adana consciousness makes patterns of habit that flow in torrents. Fearing you will confuse the truth with what is not, I rarely tell you of all this. Adana. Adana means alaya. Maybe it's the then term. We sometimes would refer it as the storehouse consciousness or the 8th consciousness. And it is described as extremely subtle. Since alaya is very subtle and quite deep consciousness. Upon it, there are the kinds of habitual tendencies, both the pure and impure. Through alaya, the flow of such habitual tendencies, that's just like grand rivers. Would carry its torrents and its flows. Over here it says that since it flows with both the pure and impure, the pure with which refers to the truth, and the dharma of nirvana, also the impure, which refers to the conventional, the false, the illusory, the contaminated, the afflictive, all of those. So the alaya teaching over here are usually not accepted by the mundane beings. So the Buddha says that since you cannot accept this teaching, therefore I rarely tell you of this teaching. Even the kinds of Shravakas and the Pratika Buddhas, the Buddha says that for such reasons, because I fear you will be confused with the truth of alaya teachings, therefore I do not often give teachings on it. The alaya teachings are usually given to the Mahayana practitioners, of course, other than the Chittamatra practitioners, whom also engage in the studies of alaya. But we can view alaya as a treasure trove. It has all kinds of things in it. It has both the pure, such as gold, silver, and jewels and treasures, as well as the impure, such as weapons and all kinds of things like such. But it is not something that we would show it to the others. It is a treasure trove that is only revealed to the inner group. So the alaya stores the things of the sentient beings. If you contemplate upon it, you should be able to find it very interesting, because each and every different sentient beings have different habitual tendencies. The virtuous roots, the vice roots, the good, the bad, and sometimes whenever we look at ourselves, we can see that since we had our already encountered the forms and the names of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it seems that we have gathered lots of virtuous roots. And sometimes, since we have lots of afflictions, then it seems that we have accumulated lots of the vice as well. So out of all kinds of causes and conditions, various kinds of fruitions would also manifest and would blossom, would come to maturation. There's another sutra that is usually quoted in many of the Mahayana Shastras. It is the Satyaнимokana Sutra. It says that the extremely subtle consciousness that is the adana, all the samsaric seeds are just like the flow that is continuous. So it is because of the sentient beings are foolish. For such reason, the Buddha do not give the teachings. The Buddha does not give teachings to the mundane beings, especially the beings below the teaching of the two yanas. The reason is because the Buddha do not want the beings that would grasp onto alaya as a self, alaya as a self. Lots of the heretics, the non-Buddhists, usually would hold on to alaya as a self. Or some would say that there is a creator, there is a maker. They would understand alaya in such a way. That is why Buddha would give teachings of this in the more profound sutra teachings, but not of the teachings given to the disciples below the two yanas. I think it's better for you to write this onto your notebook, because there are lots of the profound teachings, profound meanings within. I feel that from alaya, there are all kinds of potentialities. As long as the causes and conditions are matured, then the fruitions would appear. Of course, there are different translation versions, but this is the version I quoted from the Tibetan Tripitaka, and many people actually really like this particular quotation. Lots of great masters of Tibetan Buddhism would often quote this as well. The following verse is a little bit difficult, so now it's time for you to bring out your wisdom to understand it. Sometimes the verses, the shlokas are a bit easier, and then sometimes it's a bit more difficult. Now here this verse states that with your own mind, you grasp at your own mind. What is not illusory turns into illusion. If you don't grasp, there is no non-illusion. If even non-illusion does not arise, how can illusory dharmas be established? This is called the wonderful lotus flower, the regal Vajra gem of enlightenment. Over here, there are different translations and different explanations, different commentaries, and here I will explain it to you according to the translation. In the Tibetan text, over here it says that the grasp is to realize. What it means is to realize. It means that if you were to use your own mind to realize, then what is not illusory, what is solid, would turn into illusion, would turn into illusory dharmas. So all of the non-illusory, that's like the things that would manifest in front of the mundane beings, They do not seem to be illusory, rather they are very solid. But if you were to realize your own mind, then what is not illusory turns into illusion. And then if you don't grasp, if you do not have enlightenment, there is no non-illusory. That means you would see what the mundane beings would see, would perceive. If you do not enlighten, then the non-illusory, then there is no non-illusory. If even non-illusory does not arise, then how can illusory dharmas be established? It means that if there is no illusory, there is no non-illusory that could arise. If no non-illusory that would arise, then how could the illusory be existent, be established? So the grasp could be explained by the word realize. There are different explanations according to some Chinese masters, such as Master O.E., Master Zhao Guang, and so on. Their explanations are a bit different. But the majority of those masters, they explain it as if you were to use your own mind to grasp your own mind. So this particular grasp shows the subject and object grasping. So if your mind started to hold on to and to grasp onto the external object, then your mind, that is your true mind, that is not illusory, will then become the illusory, the false appearance will become the false objects. If you do not grasp, at the time of devoid of subject and devoid of object and subject, without the samsaric grasping, then everything is simply without non-illusion nor the illusion. Because if non-illusion do not establish, cannot be established, how could illusion be established? It is to say that if you have not attained realization and to hold on to the objects with the subject, if you have dichotomy, then everything would simply be illusion. And then if you do not have the dichotomy, then both illusory and non-illusory would not be established. At the time of enlightenment, when you have no grasping whatsoever, if the non-illusory is not existent, how could illusory be established? How could illusory be existent? That is not possible. And I think it's better for you to look into the Lankavatara Sutra, and that probably would have a better explanation. It says that the negative habitual tendencies would influence the mind. For such a reason, there are all kinds of appearances that would manifest. Since our false mind would start to grasp onto the external objects, since the mind thinks that there are the external objects such as mountains, rivers, ground, and so on, then there is the grasping towards those falsity, towards those forms and appearances, such as the sound and the things that we see, the colors, as well as all kinds of forms. In such a way, the sentient beings will slowly wander and take the cyclic existence in samsara. It is simply because we have not attained understanding, have not attained realization. Also, according to Lankavatara Sutra, it says that if we were to make observation with our mind, to see our mind, then we would be able to part from all kinds of of dualistic distinctions, all kinds of subjects and objects, all kinds of dichotomies. And if we can continuously to practice in such a way, we will definitely see the truth. We will definitely see the Buddha. There is no doubt in it, because we will see the nature of all phenomena. And the teaching given over here is very similar to that of the Lankavatara Sutra. The Lankavatara Sutra has been placed of great importance in Tibetan Buddhism as well. Now let's look at the next part where it says that this is called the wonderful lotus flower, the regal Vajra gem of enlightenment. In this Samadhi that is likened to illusion, transcend all study instantly. We usually would say that everything is just like a dream and like an illusion. We know that within the absolute truth, nothing can be obtained. Within the conventional truth, everything is just like a dream, like an illusion. In the absolute truth, everything is parted from four extremes and all conceptual elaborations. You can say that, but when you truly make the observation, even the illusion and non-illusion cannot be established. Whenever you can truly understand that, whenever you come to such kind of realization, then this is a samadhi. This is a samadhi that is likened to, that is the lotus-like samadhi. That is called the wonderful lotus flower samadhi, because the lotus doesn't have any defilement. It is completely pure and undefiled. This kind of samadhi, according to the sutra, it says that it is the regal Vajra gem of enlightenment, because it is regal like the king, like the emperor. Also, it is a Vajra gem. It is like a gem. It's very precious. It is like the king of the Vajra. So it is a type of enlightenment or fruition. Also, there's another term to it. This is called the samadhi that is likened to illusion, the illusion samadhi. By abiding in this illusion-like samadhi, one would be able to have all kinds of displays within this world, since we know that this world simply displays itself without any self-nature. By relying on it, one would be able to benefit immeasurable numbers of sentient beings. This is called illusion-like samadhi. At the time of obtaining this, one would be able to instantaneously transcend all studies. According to the Mahayana, if we were to look at it from the angle of Mahayana, if one were to attain the fruition of no more studies, then there is no other further fruitions. That is the end of the journey. But according to a commentary, it says that this particular explanation, this particular transcending of all studies, is the transpassing of the arhathood and all the two yanas, also, which shows that one would be able to attain the fruition of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. According to Master Changshui, he stated that one would be able to instantaneously surpass to transcend all studies. There are all kinds of transcending that could be associated to it. In the Mahayana teaching, it talks about how, in the Mahāti teachings, it talks about how one can instantaneously fulfill all kinds of merits. And the teaching here quoted from the perfectly enlightened, the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, where it says that at the time of recognizing illusion is to part from it. There is no longer any of those skillful means that's needed at the causal stage. At the time of being parted from illusion, in fact, that is realization, that is enlightenment. There is no other step-by-step stages anymore. As you can see, even according to the Mahayana exoteric teachings, it also states that one can come to full realization within a very short period of time. So the full attainment within one lifetime that is stated in Tibetan Buddhism is indeed reasonable. Even within the Zen Buddhism, in the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, it talks about one would be able to attain realization instantaneously, that in the flick of the finger, in the snap of the fingers, during that short period of time, one would be able to attain all the merits, to completely perfect all the merits of all the paths. That is reasonable. So when it comes to the teachings of the realizations that a person would be able to attain in a very short period of time, you should not doubt it. This is simply common. This is simply normal. It speaks it in the Sutra of Perfect Realization. It says that if one were to part from illusion, that is realization, and then there is no need for any further steps, any systematic steps. You need to really memorize it, especially those ones that would be able to prove the teachings of our own schools, the unsurpassed Mahayati. Also, you could use those to destroy your own doubts as well as the doubts and the wrong views of the others. These are the great tools that you can use to eradicate the wrong views, so it's quite necessary. The Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment speaks of the realization of the bodhisattvas. This is really wonderful. I think the teaching that had been given by Master Nanhuai Jing is, well, I don't know how the disciples had collected his work, but I think it is a little bit leaning to the academic side. Also, his teachings of the Surangama Sutra is not as extensive. The ones that's rather very well known, that's taught by Master Nanhuai Jing, including his teachings on the Diamond Sutra as well as the Sutra of Perfect Realization. I tried to listen to the audios of Master Nanhuai Jing, but his Mandarin is very difficult to understand. Maybe because of the time, maybe because people didn't quite all use the Mandarin dialect back then. We can see the language with heavy dialect or heavy accents could be also an obscuration. And then over here it says that this Abhidharma, incomparable, is the single pathway through Nirvana's gate, taken by Bhagavans in all the 10 directions. The Abhidharma, usually we would take it as the Mahayana Abhidharma, Hinayana Abhidharma. But over here, the Abhidharma means the peerless Dharma. This peerless Dharma that is incomparable by any other teachings, any other philosophies. It is the most supreme. It is also the single path through Nirvana's gate, taken by Bhagavans in all the 10 directions, by all the world-honored ones in all the 10 directions. Usually when we study the Great Illusory Net, we often would hear the kinds of descriptions of this is the processing objects of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions, the pinnacle of all the yanas, and so on and so forth. We would hear all kinds of praises. And over here, this is a praise. So what it points to is that this is really the most supreme, the most important. All the Tathagatas of the 10 directions, by relying on this teaching, had attained realization. This is the only path that they had relied on to attain the nirvana of non-duality. When I read into the commentary, I read that some great masters of Tang and Ming dynasty, at the time of reading this particular shloka, had attained realization, and I can't quite remember the stories related to it, but I think you can look into it. Some of the great masters, upon relying this particular shloka, had attained realization. You should be able to find it online, but of course I'm not too sure if you can find it online still, because the Tripitaka, the Qianlong's version of the Tripitaka is quite big, and it's very difficult to open it up to look up for the information. Nowadays, it's harder to look up information online. Maybe it's because of the pandemic. Maybe after the pandemic, everything will become better. Now we have already completed all the shloka part. Let's look at the teaching here. It is in the sutra. It says that when Ananda and the Great Assembly heard the unsurpassed, compassionate instruction of the Buddha, the thus come one, this harmonious and brilliant Gaya verse, with its clear and penetrating wonderful principles, their hearts and eyes were opened, and they exclaimed the Dharma such as this had never been before. Over here, the Great Assembly, along with Ananda, upon hearing the compassionate instructions given by the Buddha, one is Gaya and one is verse. The Gaya is the reiterative verse, which recapitulates the prose that precedes it. And then there is also the sudden arising verse. The two types of verses were placed together and clearly, as well as brilliantly, harmoniously explained the essential instructions. The two types of verses harmoniously expounded the wonderful principles. The teaching and instruction of the Buddha was expounded with great clarity and with great penetration. Now, the hearts and eyes of Ananda, as well as the Great Assembly, were opened. Well, look at us. We had also listened to the previous parts of the teachings as well. Have we also opened our minds and hearts and eyes? So compared to the Great Assembly, we're quite pitiful. After hearing the shlokas, after hearing the teachings on Alaya, on the three types of samadhi, have we come to realization? Have we opened up our hearts and our eyes? Have we come to some kinds of insights and epiphany? Have we had some kinds of realization? Have we felt to receive some blessings? If you don't have any kinds of feelings after receiving such penetrating teachings, but only thinking of when is it time to end the class, when is it time to have my dinner, and when is lunch tomorrow, what should I eat tomorrow, what time can I sleep, and how much allowance would I be able to get this month, how much is the vegetables now, and do I have enough enough rice? Is my rice going to get expired? And am I going to take revenge upon this person who had treated me wrong? Well, have you had any feelings that's different than all your mundane habitual tendencies and your mundane conceptual minds? Ananda puts his palms together. Look at Ananda. He right away put his palm together, bowed, and said to the Buddha, having heard the Buddha's unbounded, greatly compassionate, pure, everlasting, true, and actual expression of Dharma. So he said that today, after hearing this great teaching that is without any obscurations, is the teaching with great compassion, and the teaching that is unbounded, greatly compassionate, pure, everlasting, true, and actual expression of the Dharma. I am so overjoyed, so happy. Today I feel that all the clouds in the space had dispersed, and the sunlight, at the time of sunlight arises from the eastern mountain, my heart became so warm, and I feel quite happy. But then his affliction started to show up again. Ananda continued to say that I still have not understood the sequence for releasing the knots, such that when the six are untied, the one is gone also. So Ananda brings up the question that, I still don't understand how the six are untied, the one is gone also, and how could... I still don't understand the sequence for releasing the knots. So those are the two questions posed by Ananda. Ananda has lots of questions. I think it's really wonderful to ask questions. Asking questions without contemplating by oneself is not good, but asking questions after contemplating is very good. We should encourage it. Some Khenpos and Khenmos usually ask very good questions, but also I notice there are people who tend to ask questions without think about the questions themselves. They don't really have any contemplations before posing the questions, and those kinds of questions are rather shallow. They are not useful questions. So I think it's better to ask deeper questions, to delve into it a little more. Over here, Ananda asked that he still doesn't understand how the six are untied, the one is gone too. What that means also, what does it mean by the sequence for releasing the knots? He then continued to say that I only hope you will be compassionate and once again take pity on this assembly and on those of the future by bestowing the sounds of the Dharma on us and wash and rinse away our heavy defilements. He then says that, may the great compassionate Buddha bestow pity upon all of the disciples over here in this Dharma assembly, as well as all the future sentient beings. Ananda is very considerate. He's considerate to not only the great assembly that attended the Dharma teaching, but also to the future generations. So we can see that Ananda indeed is the manifestation of Buddhism Bodhisattvas. He is quite compassionate to bestow the Dharma teachings to the future generations so that the beings would be able to enjoy the Dharma teaching, the Amrita of the Dharma, the nectar of the Dharma that could rinse and wash away our defilements. And Buddha over here says, well, you have too much questions. I think there was once a study states that actually calculated how many questions Ananda actually posed to the Buddha. I think it would be quite interesting to study the Surangama Sutra, to truly explore the Surangama Sutra, and to have the different statistics on how many times Ananda cried and Ananda asked questions and what each of the questions are. then I think it would be really interesting. Then to answer the question of Ananda, the Buddha uses an example. I particularly take this katak, this red-colored katak, to demonstrate as well. Then up on the lion's throne, the thus come one straightened his nirvana robes, arranged his samgati, took hold of the table made of the 7 gems, reached out onto the table with his hand, and picked up a flowered cloth given him by the Surangama god. At that time, the Buddha was sitting on top of the lion's throne. At the time when Buddha is about to give very important and crucial teachings, he would straighten his clothing a bit. At first, he straightened the nirvana robe. The nirvana robe refers to the inner layer of the clothing or the inner garment. And then the samgati. The samgati is the outer clothing, the external garment, or the monastic robe. So he slightly straightened his clothing. After sitting on top of the lion's throne, sometimes he would straighten up his clothing, his attire. And then he took hold of the table made of the 7 gems. Reached out onto the table with his hand and picked up a flower cloth given him by Surangama god. Surangama god comes from the heaven named well-divided time. And then this particular flowered cloth refers to the brocade or some kinds of patterned and weaved silk. The Tibetan translation used the same term, the same as karta and brocade. So it could be a kata, because the celestial being could probably brought a kata as a beautiful gift to offer to the Buddha. Another possibility is that a type of clothing that the celestial beings would wear is the flowered cloth or the brocade. There are different meanings to this term in the Tibetan translation. After the Buddha picked up the flowered cloth, he made a knot of it. I will demonstrate how it looks. I think it's going to explain it more clearly. I'm not the Buddha, but I want to make sure this teaching is clear to you. Then, as the assembly watched, the Buddha tied it into a knot and showed it to Ananda, asking, "What is this called?" Ananda and great assembly answered together, "It's called a knot." Everyone talked in the same voice, saying that this is a knot. Then the thus come one tied another knot in the cloth of the layered flowers and asked Ananda again, "What is this called?" So the Buddha repeated his action again. After making another knot into the brocade, he asked Ananda again, "What is this?" Ananda and the great assembly once again answered together, "It too is called a knot," because the Buddha made a knot twice. So Ananda and the assembly assembly also answered twice. The Buddha continued in this pattern of actions until he had tied 6 knots in the cloth of the layered flowers in this brocade. As he made each knot, he held it up to Ananda and asked, "What is this called?" After making knots after knots for 6 times, and then held it up each time, asking Ananda and the assembly, saying, "What is this called?" Ananda and the assembly answered, "They are knots." As the Buddha made each knot, he held it up to Ananda and asked, "What is this called?" For each of the knots, the Buddha would ask Ananda and the assembly, asking them what this is. What is this called? He would ask for each of the times. And then each time, Ananda and the great assembly answered the Buddha in the same way. It is called a knot. Altogether, the Buddha made the knots for 6 times and then answered for the assembly answered for 6 times their knots after the Buddha asked them for 6 times as well. At this time, the Buddha said to Ananda, "When I first tied the cloth, you called it a knot. Since the cloth of layered flowers is basically a single strap, how can you call the second and the third ties as knots as well?" The Buddha said that, well, at the beginning, I did make a knot out of this brocade, out of this kata. You said that this is a knot. When I then again make another knot, you said that the first one was a knot, and then you said that this is also a knot. The second, third, and fourth, all of those times, you also call them knots as well. The Buddha seems to agree that the first one is a knot, and then the Buddha is asking, are you also saying that the rest of the times that I tied the flower brocade, you call them as knots as well? Ananda then said to the Buddha, "World-honored one, this cloth of woven layered flowers is just one piece. But as I consider it, when the thus come one makes one tie, it is called a knot. If he were to make 100 ties, they would be called 100 knots. How much more so with this cloth, which has exactly 6 knots, not 7 or 5? Why does the thus come one allow me to call only the first tie as a knot, but not the second or the third?" Ananda said that while this flower brocade, this flowered clothing that's being offered by the celestial being, is no other than a woven cloth. After tying it for 6 times, there is only of one cloth. Ananda says that the first tie results in the first knot. And we would call it as the first knot. After making 100 knots, I would consider that on this piece of cloth, there are 100 knots. On the same brocade, if they are made of 100 times of ties, then there are 100 knots. And then Ananda says that, well, there are not 100 ties anyways, there are only 6 ties.
也并不是这个不到这个五个，就是你也没有在五个上面
It
停
is
四个
not
上面停
5, it is not 7.
因为它是标
It
示
has
这个六根嘛
exactly 6 knots, since
就是佛陀是因
the
为用这
number
种
6
比喻
over
就是讲
here
这个六根的这个
shows
本体是怎么
the
样的，
6
然后它的这
roots.
个每一个现
And
象
the
是怎么样
Buddha's
的，要觉着这样的
key
一个知
teaching
识，
is
所以说
to
当时呢
the Buddha's intention is to give the instruction on the nature of
但
the
你没
6
有到100
roots.
个戒，就是只有这样6个戒，
So
6个戒呢也不多
Ananda
也不
here
少，
noticed
这样
that
的
there
话
are 6
我为什
knots,
么
not
是不
7,
能
not
说这个
5?
戒呢？就是云何如来秩序
Why
处世
does thus Kangwan allow me to only call the first tie a knot,
第三和
but
第
not the
四
second
第二
or
和第
the
三
third
呢，就是
ties?
不明为戒，就是我在搞不清楚。
I don't understand,
就
Ananda
我
over here
我搞不
states.
清楚，我不知道搞不清楚。原来是有一个什么，就是讲考班的一个，这个我搞不清楚，这个我搞不清楚。
It sounds like some of our
所以
Sangha
我搞不
members,
清楚，就是
they
就
would
是
say
第
that
二
I
和
don't
第三为什
understand.
么是不能这个说这个戒啊？就是第一个才可以叫，第二个三个。
Why is the
就当
first
当这个
one
这些的
considered
就
as
不
a
能去
tie
说戒，
but
就是这
not
个我有点
considered
不
as a
懂，
knot
就是这
but
样。
not the second
然
or
后这个
third?
时候呢，就是佛陀就是告诉阿
And
难，
then
就是佛
the
告阿
Buddha
难
told Ananda,
此报化己呢，如之次
you know that
尽
this precious
原
cloth
之
of
一
flowers
条
is basically
就是佛
one
陀说
strip.
是你这个知道是你现在这个花茎也好，哈达也好，
Look at
这个的
this
话呢，你知道
cloth.
是就是它原来呢就是还是只是这个
It is of
一条
one
对吧？就是
strip,
它是一
right?
条线，就是这是这个一根，就是这个是。然后我6万四命6戒，就是然后我大了这个6个戒的话呢，就是你成为呢。
When I made
6
6 ties in it, you said it had 6 knots.
然后关键下面的这个
They
问
both
题呢，
agree to
就
it.
是如身观察晶体色。
As you carefully
理解
consider
有
this,
益
you
啊
will
就是
see that
现
the
在你应该
substance
就是
of the
详细地
cloth
去
is
观
the
察
same.
观察什么呢？
When you
我们的
make the
这个花茎的
observation
这个
of
本体呢，
this
就是是一
cloth
个
of
这个
flowers,
同体的，就是这
it
个
simply
这个没有
has
什么。
one
但是因为
entity.
这个
It
戒
is
的不
of
同
one
呢，就是
entity.
它就有不同的这个现象。
However,
第一个戒和第二个戒、第三个戒、
it
第
is the
四个戒、第
knots
五个
that
戒、第
makes the
六个戒，
difference.
就
There
是
are
现在
6
我们
knots.
有不同的这样的这个6个戒嘛。那6个戒的话，那就是这
After
个
making
这
the
个哈
6
达上是
knots,
一样的，但是这个
the
6个戒呢，就是因为
flower
戒的原因呢，
garment,
就
the
是有不同的。
the cloth of flower is the
于
same,
运河
but the 6 knots are
除
different.
万乘戒名为第一。
And
那你是
then,
怎么想的？
what do you
你
think?
是你
The
是这么
Buddha
想
asked
的？你
Ananda,
刚
what
开
do you
始第
think?
一
The
个就
first
是
knot
大
I
的这个
tied
戒呢，
was
是不是
called
就是第一
number
个
1.
啊？就是
The
成为
first knot.
成为第一个戒，就是吧？就是这
Let's
样。
call it the first
如
knot.
是来着，第
Continuing
6戒
until
啊
I
然
come
后
to
呢
the
就一
6th
直说
knot,
第二个这个大
and
完了
as I
以后
now
就叫
tie
第二
it, is
第
it
二个
also
戒
number
然后
1?
第三个大完了以后叫第
After I
三个
making
戒
it
第
the
四个
second knot,
第五个
third
第
and
六
fourth
个
and
大完
fifth
了
and
以
the
后的话
6th
呢，第
knot,
6个戒，因为你每个都有就是自己的这种方式来这个大戒，就是这样的话呢，是不是
since I
到
would
最后
make
是第
6
6个
knots
戒
at
就
the
会
end
产
of
生？
it,
那这样的
I
话
have 6
问题
knots.
就来
Now
了。
here's
我
my
尽力
question.
讲第6戒名成第一佛啊，就那我就问这个第6个戒呢，
As
现在
I
不是我
now
们有
tie
6个戒
it,
吗？那第6个戒呢，就是是不是第一个戒？就是我要问你。
I am coming to
那
the
这个就
6th
阿难就
knot.
觉得是比较简
Is
单
it
就
also
不以
number
世
1
尊
knot?
6戒若存第
Ananda thought it, this
四
is
第
easy.
六
No,
名
world
非
honored one.
终非
If
第
there
一
are 6 knots, the 6th
阿难
knot
就是
can
说啊，
never
就
be
这
called
个世
number
尊呢，
1.
就是这个是
In
肯定
all
第六个
my
戒肯定
lives
不
of
是这个
learning,
第
with
第一
all
个
my
戒啊，就是这
understanding,
样
how
6戒
could
存
I
在的
now
话呢，
confuse with
那
the
么第
names of
6个
6
这个
knots?
戒的名字呢，
Ananda
就是
says
绝对
that,
不是
well,
第一个戒。这个
I
我
am
们都
very
知道是
certain
就
of
是
that,
是
world
这个第
honored
6个
one.
戒是
The first knot
就
is
是这
here,
边
and
的，
then
就
the
是然后
6th
第一个
knot
戒
is
是这
definitely
边的，
not
就是那么第6个戒
of
是
the
不可能
first
是
knot.
到第一个了，就是这个是
The
这个
first, the
不可能
6th
的。
cannot be the first.
那么他说
That is not
从
possible.
我就是今生
And then
今
he
世
said
命
that
便如何
in
明
all
示
my lives
细
of
节
learning,
乱
with
明？
all my
他说
understanding, how could I now
我那个
confuse the
纵然我
names
这
of
个阿
6
难觉得就
knots?
是就经历自己的这
Ananda
个
says
很多
that,
这个生
wow,
生世世的话呢，就是我经历这个生生世世
after
很多
lifetimes
这个生世来，我利用我的这个最聪明的这个智慧来就进行辨别
after
的话呢，
I have
永
gained
远也
all
是
of
不可能
those
就是把第
wisdom,
6个戒呢
I
就是
would
变成
never
第
mix
一个啊，就这样的
the
这种这
understanding
个
of
戒
the
的这种
first
混乱的
knot
现象呢，就是
to
我
the
是绝
6th
对不会
knots.
承认的，就是
That is
不
simply
仅是我现在就
mixing them up, I would not not agree to that. I would not get confused. Let's see if you will. We are getting a little bit concerned for Ananda because Ananda usually at first would get quite confident with his answers, but later his answers would get refuted. So we'll see. But I think Ananda definitely represents our answer as well. If the Buddha were to ask us, we would also say that the sixth knot is not the first knot. And then the Buddha said, so it is. The sixth knot are not the same. The six knots are not the same. Consider their origin. They are created from one cloth. To confuse their order will not do. The Buddha says that, well, you're right. The six knots are not the same. However, from its causes and conditions, if we were to revert to its origin, all the six knots are on the same strip of cloth. That's its basic cause. They are created from one cloth. To confuse their order will not do. So over here the Buddha just briefly expounded to Ananda, saying that if you were to confuse their orders, that will not do. And then the Buddha said that your six sense organs are also like this. So your six organs are also like this. We will stop here today because I want you to also contemplate upon it yourself. The Buddha over here says that your six sense organs are also like this. In the midst or ultimate sameness, conclusive differences arises. The nature of them is the same. They are of wondrous nature, the true nature, the Tathagata, emptiness. They are of the same nature. They are luminous clarity, they are luminous emptiness, they are the non-duality of luminous emptiness, the Buddha nature. They are simply within this pure nature. However, just like the example, one strip of cloth has been made into six knots. The nature of them is of emptiness and luminosity, but appears the six roots. So it states that they are definitely different. The first knot is not the second, and second is not the third. In its manifestation, we can see that they are not to be confused, but the nature of them, from the appearance of it, they're not to be confused, but from the nature of it, they're the same. Now, this is the question. We'll continue next class.